So as I mentioned earlier, this year's theme is exploring water, essential source, essential symbol. Our meditation today uses the symbol of a stream flowing to the sea to illustrate us uniting to form the free church. It's a beautiful image. But of course, just like real streams and seas, the process of streams joining to rivers to the ocean can be a messy endeavor. Today, I'm focusing on water as an essential source and addressing the human rights aspects of water. And while the following is a bit of an oversimplification, I believe there is truth in this statement. Water is constantly cycling. It moves from liquid to condensation and sometimes freezes. And although we probably don't see that much except for when it comes out of our ice makers. And so while in theory, one can pretend to own the water on one's property, the water there today is not the same water that was there yesterday, unless it is captured and put in a shelf in a super airtight container, taking it out of the cycle. And even then, eventually, it will evaporate. Water has its own life. And while we can enjoy it, part of its beauty is its very cyclical, flowing essence. In environmental circles, water is considered a shared or common resource. In other words, like our atmosphere, something that we all have a right to enjoy, and as a result, a resource for which we all bear responsibility. We begin our lives in water. And of course, our very lives depend on safe drinking water and sanitation. But few of us in this congregation today wake up worried about the safety of our water. Some of us complain about the taste, but we do have confidence in its safety. So who does own water? I thought we would begin with our principles. 4 of our 7 principles directly inform this question. Water access is a justice issue. Our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. To me, what that says is all persons are deserving of water. Second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Together, we have to work towards justice in the delivery and sharing of our water resources. Our 6th principle is the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Most water systems cross or share borders, and water use and ownership often results in water wars. To paraphrase, without water justice, there is no water peace. And of course, our 7th principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. So lastly, although all of our water issues may be different in an interdependent web, if one is lacking access, we're all lacking access. In 2010, the UN explicitly recognized the human right of access to safe, clean water and safe and hygienic sanitation. And in 2013, the UUSC chose the human right to water as one of its primary areas of focus. In 2020, during this pandemic, the UUSC called on us to remind Congress that water is life. So I'm going to take just a second as an aside here and make a little plug for the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. Our congregation in Brunswick typically holds guests at our table next Sunday. And for the first time in many years, we won't be doing that. So if you have ever donated to UUSC in the past, you've already got your appeal letter for December. And we urge you to make a donation. If you haven't ever donated, you can easily go to uusc.org and make a donation there. So back to the question, who owns water? Well, the simple answer is that water belongs to all of us. Each of us has a right to safe drinking water and safe sanitation. But the reality is not so simple. Water flows. It is a thing of beauty, and yet it means that anything done upriver affects everyone downriver. In this way, as our anthem today says, the water remembers. It is truly a blessing and a curse. In north of Statesboro, the Ogichi River flows east and south to the Atlantic Ocean at Asaba Island. Recently, the Ogichi River keeper, known as ORC, discovered that Milliken's Longleaf facility just north of Statesboro was discharging PFAs. PFAs are a category of man-made carcinogenic chemicals and are considered forever chemicals because they don't break down in the environment and they accumulate in wildlife, plants, and humans. They initiated a pilot study to determine if these chemicals were bioaccumulating in the fish regularly caught and consumed by people from the river. Initial results show that all fish sampled had detectable limits of PFAs in their tissue fillets. They will continue to monitor. In Brunswick and the Golden Isles, we are surrounded by majestic waters, Superfund sites, and decades of abuse from companies like Hercules, Pinova, and LCP Chemicals and Honeywell. And of course, as a shipping port, we've been hosting the Golden Ray, first slice pictured here, off our coast for well over a year. The Altamaha Riverkeeper is doing an excellent job of monitoring the fallout from the Golden Ray debacle. Well, those are two issues that are close to home, one in Statesboro, others here in Brunswick. But here are some broader concerns. One not so far from home, Georgia, Florida, and Alabama have been in a water war for decades. As a casual observer, as the upstream entity, Georgia has positioned itself in a pretty unbecoming way to accommodate the super growth of the Atlanta suburbs, creating problems for Alabama and the Apalachicola region of Florida. Further from home, there are horrific stories of lead poisoned water in Flint, Michigan, shutoffs in Detroit, and plenty of other places, leading to tragic, permanent consequences for families. The cost of access to water in the United States is often rising at a rate greater than inflation. During the last 4 years, US water protections have been weakened significantly as waterways and wetlands were redefined in favor of stronger property rights. Internationally, water privatization has been encouraged by the World Bank out of a belief that governments waste too much water and private companies with a profit motive would handle the issue better. And then there's this last fact and a personal pet peeve of mine, I think worthy of its own talk. Bottled water consumption has hit a high of almost 40 gallons per capita in 2018, surpassing bottled soda drinks for the first time. This is a trailer from the film documentary released in 2008 called Flow for the Love of Water that touches on some of the issues I've already mentioned and talks a little bit, fills in a little bit more.
Most people don't think about where their water comes from. They just turn on the tap and they expect it to be there. Those days are ending. Humans are changing the climate. We already see evidence about it. One of the most significant impacts of climate change will be on our water resources.
This notion that we'll have water forever is wrong. The world is running out of fresh water. In the last 10 years, major water companies from Europe have started taking advantage of pollution and scarcity. Who owns water? Who gets to make the decisions about water?
Water privatization was forced on Bolivia by the World Bank.
Water is the most precious commodity for them in the world. It's blue gold.
Water is a common resource. Water is not a property.
The water sector is going to grow at 2 to 3 times the global economy over the next 20 years.
The market is amoral, and it's going to lead you to selling to those who can buy it and not to those who need it.
They're spending tens of millions of dollars to convince us that bottled water is better than tap water.
There is less than one person regulating the entire bottled water industry. People buying this stuff had no idea where it was coming from.
The company kept pumping during a season of drought.
They took so much water, they're being sued in 5 states.
They kept pumping even then.
We're fighting this battle, this David and Goliath battle.
Water must be protected everywhere.
Who owns the water for survival owns you. And that's the picture that people have to understand.
It's not a Democratic issue and it's not a Republican issue. It's a people issue.
Without water, we have no society, we have no economy, we have no life.
People say that, well, water's a lot like air. You shouldn't charge for water. Well, okay, watch what happens.
Water is a people issue, but laws do matter. Brian Palmer, in an article in the National Resources Defense Council, the NRDC, says, the US Code contains thousands of mentions of water, but nowhere does it state that water is a human right. In fact, the only such statement I could find in the whole of US law is in the California Water Code, which boldly declares that every human being has the right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water. However, in California, the law is really more aspirational than practical. While it states that all relevant state agencies have an ongoing obligation to consider the human right to water in executing budgetary and programmatic duties, frankly, considering does not guarantee action. We all must depend on our water suppliers to provide the infrastructure, testing, and actual flow of water to our homes. But these water suppliers, they work for us. They represent our common interests. How can our communities be served equitably? In 2016, the UUSC issued a report called The Invisible Crisis: Water Unaffordability in the United States, authored by Patricia Jones and Amber Moulton. Its basic point is this: making clean, affordable water available to all US residents is a civil rights challenge for this century and a moral challenge requiring immediate action. The report recommends the following steps. 1, to mandate data collection to the household level about costs, lack of access, shutoffs, and request that the reporting be transparent, accessible, and free of jargon. Secondly, to ensure universal, non-discriminatory access to safe, affordable drinking water and sanitation for urban and rural consumers and all people experiencing homelessness. Third, establish affordability standards. And by that, what they say is that costs should not exceed 2.5% of all monthly household income for services. All levels of government must act to adopt affordability programs. Underneath affordability programs, they suggest banning water shutoffs for non-payment when consumers clearly do not have the ability to pay. And at a minimum, keep shutoffs from happening for homes with low-income children, the elderly, persons with disabilities, pregnant and lactating women, persons with chronic illness. Also underneath the affordability, require regulatory agencies to study and remedy the impact of regulated and unregulated pollution on the cost of water and sanitation. Then prioritize and target all water and sanitation funding to those who do not currently have it, vulnerable populations first. Lastly, adopt the human right to water and sanitation into domestic law with clear enforcement mechanisms and remedies. The whole report is available at uusc.org. And if you happen to be there to make your annual donation, you can search for it. Water is essential. Let us remember the words of Dr. King. Justice denied anywhere diminishes justice everywhere. Let us work towards water justice in our own communities and beyond. May it be so.